Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, I know you guys are going to be excited for this guest because multiple times when I have asked, who do you want on the show? So many times people have said, Gary Brecka, get him on. We need him on. And so that is who we have on the show today. And so honored that you're here. Thank you, Gary, for doing this for us.
Yeah, you're super welcome. I'm excited to be here. I love your mission.
Well, thank you. Okay, a lot of my listeners obviously know you. They wanted you on the show, but for those that maybe don't know exactly what you do, will you just give a little bit of background about yourself and how you got involved in all the biohacking type things that you do?
Well, my name is Gary Brecka. I'm a human biologist. So my undergraduate training was in biology. My postgraduate training was in human biology. And for 22 years, I was a mortality expert for large life insurance companies, which meant that if we got 10 years of medical records and 10 years of demographic data on you, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And I get a lot of flack for that, but it's actually some of the most accurate science in the world. You know, there's a lot of financial services products that are actually based on mortality, believe it or not. You know, annuities, reverse mortgages, life insurance, obviously, but people don't realize that when you apply for a very large life insurance policy, they really don't care where you are on an actuarial curve. They want to know your specific mortality, meaning how many more months does this person have left on Earth? And the way that they determine that is that they have data that no other financial services enterprise, in fact, no other collegiate university, not even the federal government has. They know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for hundreds of millions of lives. And what they do is they take that data and they pull it back into the record and they look at the progression of disease and pathology, your pharmaceuticals, the chemicals and synthetics that you're taking, and they look at biomarkers. And they look at these early biomarkers as a way of predicting the onset of, the severity of, and how soon people will succumb to all forms of pathology and disease. And for me, what became glaringly apparent in doing that type of research and doing that type of analysis is that, you know, the thing that was keeping people from living longer, healthier, happier lives were what we called modifiable risk factors. So during my career, had I had a chance to even pick up the phone and just have any contact with the patient or any contact with the treating physician, I could have materially changed the trajectory of their life.
Wow.
Sadly, I wasn't allowed to have any contact with the patient or the treating physician. Even if we saw life-threatening drug interactions, we could not warn the patient. And, at some point I realized that there were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets, that it wasn't just data. And I made a conscious decision to leave and spend the balance of my lifetime teaching people how to live healthier, happier, longer lives. And I've often said that if that database that I had access to could see the light of day, it would permanently change the face of humanity. It would upend modern medicine in a way that would just be catastrophic. We know the trajectory of every pharmaceutical compound, every chemical, every synthetic. We know what early metabolic syndrome does, going for decades undetected until it raises, its ugly head. And you see that most of humanity is walking around at about 50% of their true state of normal. And the distance between where they are now and true normalcy, what most people would say, I feel amazing, which is truly just feeling normal. And that distance is a few raw materials missing from their body. When you deplete the human body of certain nutrients, certain minerals, certain amino acids, certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. Rarely is disease or pathology something that happens to us. In almost every instance, it's something that happens within us. And, we spend so much time, in my opinion, getting data on everything in our life except our temple. I find that when I speak at, conferences that are non-wellness related, I'll, entrepreneurial conferences, for example, but success and motivation conferences, which I'm a huge fan of. If you go around the audience and you ask everybody what's more important, your health or your wealth? What's more important, your health or your business? In almost every case, they'll say their health. But if you bring them up on the stage and you ask them a sequence of questions about their business, they will nail every single one of them. They know their income statement, they know their P&L, they know their balance sheet, they know their gross revenue, net revenue, number of employees, employee revenue per head. And then you ask them simple questions like, well, what's your hemoglobin A1C? Where are your hormone levels? What's your vitamin D3 level? They're just blank. Wow. So the truth is we spend so much more time getting information on our businesses than we do on our temple. Even though we live a healthy lifestyle, we haven't taken the time to get data to find out, what could be missing from my body that's keeping it from performing optimally. And then what we do is we accept so many things as a consequence of aging or our environment or stress or our kids or our career or what have you. And it's usually not a consequence of any of those things. It's a consequence of missing raw material, right? People just accept a mild amount of anxiety, mood numbness for years on end, poor sleep or mediocre sleep, lack of clean, clear waking energy, short-term recall, response to exercise, healthy libido. And we let these tiny little anchors keep getting thrown off of our stern, and we just add power to the motor. We develop what we call, coping mechanisms. Most people with anxiety have learned to cope with anxiety. Yeah. Most people with poor sleep have developed a routine that just lets them deal with just being tired. And the truth is, if we would take some time to get some information on our temple, it would serve us in a way that people just couldn't imagine.
Well, I love that you said that, because the other day at work, actually, I asked all my employees, I said, you probably know how much money is in your bank account, but can you even tell me what your cholesterol levels are? Can you even tell me what your vitamin D levels are? So sort of the same thing. And so they couldn't, which is crazy.
I found it in rooms full of hundreds of people. I've offered $1,000 rewards if one person in the room could tell me what their hemoglobin A1C was or their D3 level, and then pull something up on their phone to show that.
Wow. Incredible. And why do you think this is? Because it's really easy to go get blood work and get this stuff tested.
It's because good is the enemy of great. And when we feel good, that's just enough, right? And so, it's the same in relationships. It's the same in businesses. Most good businesses don't become great because once it's good, we accept, mediocrity, and we accept the absence of disease as being the presence of optimal health. If you go to most physicians, and I'm a huge fan of modern medicine. People think that I'm anti-pharmaceutical, anti-modern medicine. To a large extent, I'm not. But what I'm saying is, when we rely on a system that is built around disease maintenance and symptom management, that's not where we go to reach a state of optimal health, right? Just not having diabetes or not having heart disease or not having insulin resistance doesn't mean you're in a state of being optimal. I always tell the story about when I was in grad school, and I had to take all these plant botany courses, which I hated, but you have to take them. And so I'm there trying to get a human biology degree, and you got to study the life cycle of algae and all this other nonsense. But the thing that struck me about plant physiology is that if you ever have a leaf, let's say rotting in a palm tree, and you call a true arborist, a true botanist out to your house, they won't touch the leaf, right? They will core test the soil. And they'll say, you know what? There's no nitrogen in this soil. And they'll add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf will heal. Only we've stopped thinking about human beings this way. We've lost so much faith in mankind and humanity and what God gave us. We believe more in what man made us and the ability of this to heal this. The frequency that we send to our body, the nutrients that we give our body. And, if you did anything to that soil but add nitrogen, it would have made little difference. So lots of things are good for plants, right? You could have put water on the soil, nothing. Could have put phosphorus on the soil, nothing. You could have put peat moss there, nothing. Nitrogen. You hit the nitrogen and the leaf heals. So once we get data, then we know exactly what's missing and what to replace. Otherwise, we are simply supplementing for the sake of supplementing. We're not supplementing for deficiency. You want to see magic things happen in the human body? Start giving it the raw material it needs to do its job. It's astounding, the simplicity of a lot of these complex conditions.
That's a great analogy with the tree. And Why don't you think more of us do that though with our own body? Like, okay, what are we deficient in? Because being deficient in certain nutrients can affect, like you said earlier, it can affect anxiety, depression, your energy levels, your hormones. I mean, a whole list of things.
Yeah, and rarely when you go see a physician do they even tell you what these are, right? I mean, like if you went to most physicians, even licensed, mental health professionals, and said, "What's anxiety?" They would give you a descriptive terminology. It's a fear of the future. It's a sensation of being anxious. It's the feeling of the presence of a fear without necessarily the presence of a fear. It can make you short of breath. It can raise your heart rate. Well, those are all of the conditions of anxiety. Right? Those are all the symptoms of anxiety. It's like, irritable bowel syndrome is a combination of gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, and irritability. Okay, well, now I've just named a cluster of symptoms. But what anxiety is a rise in catecholamines in the brain. There is a class of neurotransmitters called catecholamines. These are fight or flight neurotransmitters. There are 4 of them. And when they rise, you feel the presence of fear. So, for example, you could drive home tonight. You could, let's say, get out of your car and somebody is standing in front of you with a knife. Okay, so very real threat, right? Your pupils would dilate, your heart rate would increase, your extremities would flood with blood. You would begin to have a fight or flight response. But you could also be laying in bed tonight and you could start thinking about getting eaten by a shark. I happen to be on the 21st floor of a condo building. So the chance of a shark getting out of that ocean and coming up that elevator are 0.
Right.
But you could have the exact same reaction. So how is it that I can have the same reaction to the presence of a real fear as to an entirely imagined fear? Because the brain does not know the difference between perception and reality. And chemically, they are the same thing. So if anxiety is a rise in catecholamines, then the solution is not to cope with a rise in catecholamines, right? Breath work, and zolpidem nitrate, Xanax, diazepam, anti-anxiety medications. It's to lower catecholamines. And the question is, how do you do that?
Right. I was just going to ask.
Yeah, of course. We have to buy my ebook. No, I don't have an ebook. To lower catecholamines, you need the right complex of B vitamins. You need a specific form of B12 called methylcobalamin, not the cyano version, methylcobalamin. You need something called methylfolate, which is the reduced form of folate. Folic acid and folate become usable in the body when it's converted to methylfolate. So if you have deficiencies in what we call these methylated nutrients, then the body cannot break down catecholamines. If you can't break down fight or flight neurotransmitters, they rise. And as they rise, the person has the sensation of anxiety without the presence of a fear. This is why most people that suffer from anxiety will tell you they have 3 characteristics. And this is how you can prove that it's a nutrient deficiency. First of all, if you say, have you had this on and off throughout your entire lifetime? They will say yes. If you say, can you always point to the specific trigger that causes it? They'll say no. I can be sitting at dinner with my family, quiet environment, the people I love the most, in a place that I love to be, and I can be sort of overwhelmed by anxiety. And the third thing is, if you ask them if anti-anxiety medications have worked, they'll say no, they just make me feel like a zombie. This is proof positive that it is not coming from a cluster of symptoms. It is coming from your physiology. And so when we put those raw materials, complex of B vitamins, the right form of methylated cobalamin, sometimes something called SAMe, methylfolate. When we put these back into the body, you didn't fix the anxiety. You just gave the body you gave it the nitrogen to heal. And what it begins to do is it begins to methylate catecholamines so that they don't rise, so that instead of walking around at a 6, you're walking around at a 2. I mean, I could go on through an endless list of these things. One of the things that I saw part of my role was to read medical records and do what we call a record extraction. So I would pull the information out of the medical records and I would put it into a mortality model. And when you do this, you start to see certain patterns over and over again in medicine. We know now that modern medicine, medical error, is the 3rd leading cause of death in America, which is astounding if you think about it. Only cancer and cardiovascular disease kill more people than modern medicine. And if we applied that statistic to any other industry, it would be laughable.
Right.
I mean, industry designed to prevent death is the third leading cause of death. And it's medical error. And it's not that physicians are trying to kill people. It's that we have a fundamental disbelief in the body's ability to fix itself. We believe that something has happened to it, not something's happened within it. Right? Modern medicine's approach to that leaf would be to cut the leaf off, spray it with poison, put a chemical on it, add a compound that is not naturally found in the soil, or completely skin the tree. Right? When we look at conditions that people are suffering from, as simple as brain fog or weight gain or water retention or poor sleep or lack of a response to exercise or low libido or all of these tiny little nagging things that we just deal with, in almost every case, you can trace those back into the root and you can find the deficiency that's missing. I would see hundreds of times clinical deficiencies in something like vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, right? Which is the only vitamin that human beings make on our own, right? It's it's arguably the most important single nutrient in the human body, and about half the world's population is clinically deficient. About 85% of the dark-complected African American, Latino populations are clinically deficient. And this nutrient, when it gets, cholecalciferol, D3, when it gets depleted to a certain point, which I saw so often in the record, you will eventually present with rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. So it starts to happen as you wake up sore and achy, like you had to work out the night before when you haven't. Soles of your feet and ankles begin to get tender and really sore when you get out of bed to walk to the bathroom and take your first beat. Eventually it spreads to your knees and your hips and your low back. And then finally you show up at your doctor's office and you're like, my joints are achy, sore, and lately it's hard to make a fist. And if you say that to the wrong physician, they'll say, well, you know what, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. Not confirming it with SED rates, what we call SED rates or RA factors, just diagnosed off of that history. And they say, we're going to put you on something called a corticosteroid, and you're just going to take this for the rest of your life, and you're going to be fine. And corticosteroids, we knew in mortality space that if you started a corticosteroid, right, you had 6 years and 1 day until you were having a joint replacement.
Wow.
It was so accurate because, initially they're anti-inflammatory, but later they begin to eat the joint like a termite. And so what would happen is 6 years and 1 day later, these people were having a joint replacement. Well, now if I could predict a joint replacement, then I could reduce what's called your ambulatory profile, which is how well you ambulate, right? How well you move. We know that sitting is the new smoking. Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality, right? Because aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. So if I could reduce your ambulatory profile, then I could bring in all of the diseases that exacerbate with reduced ambulation, with reduced mobility. And now you could predict not only the onset of, but the severity of, and how quickly somebody would succumb to a condition. So if you start to roll that back, you succumb to a disease that you never should have had because of an operation that was unnecessary, because of a condition that you did not have resulting from a medication that wasn't required.
Wow.
All because of a nutrient deficiency. And I could give you hundreds of examples like this. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah. I have a tendency to ramp.
I have a couple questions, though, to ask you about these nutrients missing, because I know so many people dealing with anxiety. I know people dealing with arthritis. If B12, B12 will help anxiety and D3 will help the arthritis, why aren't doctors giving them those nutrients in before they're trying other things? Because people with anxiety will suffer with this for years and years before they ever do anything nutrient-wise.
Well, because sadly, they're not, it's not that they're not educated. They're not educated in the ability for the body to heal itself. They're educated in using external chemical synthetics, pharmaceuticals to heal the body. I mean, if you just think about it at its basic premise, right? If you have attention deficit disorder, ADD, then you're not deficient in Adderall. I mean, if you have hypertension, you're likely not missing a beta blocker. or an ACE inhibitor. That's not what's happening to you, is the lack of ACE inhibitor or lack of beta blocker. And so, a large portion of what we diagnose in medicine is what we call idiopathic. So, for example, 85% of all essential or primary hypertension, high blood pressure, is idiopathic, which in medicine means of unknown origin. So this means 85% of the time, you're welcome to look the statistic up, 85% of the time when we tell you you have high blood pressure, we have no idea why. And if your father or your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather has it, we will tell you that it is familial, that it is genetically inherited, that you got it from your ancestors without any evidence to support that. In fact, the next time a doctor says that you have familial hypertension or genetically inherited high blood pressure or genetically inherited hypothyroid, just ask them, what gene did I inherit from my parent that gave me that disease? And their face will go blank, right? So I don't believe that anything is unexplained, that it's idiopathic. I just believe that we need to find the cause in the body. We need to find the nitrogen. And one of the best ways to do that is to get tested for something called methylation. It's a test you do once in your lifetime. You definitely don't have to do the test through me. There are lots of genetic labs around the country that do this. It's called genetic methylation test. It's usually a cheek swab. And you send it into a lab, and it comes back and it tells you exactly what raw materials your body can convert into the usable form and what it can't. So, for example, there is not a single compound known to mankind, not one. There's no vitamin, no mineral, no amino acid, no nutrient of any kind that we put into the human body that gets used in the form that we put it in. Mm-hmm. Without a single exception, everything that enters our body gets converted into the usable form. This conversion process is mostly called methylation. Methylation is the process, for example, of taking folic acid and converting it to methylfolate. Well, what if you're one of the 44% of the population that has a gene mutation called MTHFR? I won't tell you what the nickname is for that gene.
Well, I do have double variant of that, so I know very well what the nickname is. So,
yeah, it doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. Right? It's in all white flour, all white rice, all white bread, all white pasta, and grains of any kind. By law in the United States, we spray our entire grain supply and all white flour, white rice, and white bread, and white pasta with the chemical folic acid. And I say chemical because folic acid does not exist anywhere naturally in nature. You cannot find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth, yet we tell pregnant women that it's a necessary part of healthy pregnancy. Right? Since when did a synthetic chemical become a necessary part of healthy pregnancy? Methylfolate prevents neural tube defects. But if you can't convert folic acid into methylfolate, then you are headed for postpartum depression, which is why prenatal vitamins are one of the leading causes of postpartum depression. You won't find a peer-reviewed study linking elevated pregnancy hormones to depression, postpartum depression, which for the record can begin during pregnancy. You won't find elevated pregnancy hormones linked to postpartum depression. So why do so many women get postpartum depression? Well, because they put 1,400 or 1,800% of the daily allowance of folic acid into a body that can't process it. And so they react to that. And then eventually when the pregnancy ends, they stop taking the prenatal vitamin and the symptoms go away. So they blame it on the pregnancy and not on the vitamin. And this happens, more often than you think.
Okay, let's actually talk about this methylating, and because it can cause an issue with B12 as well. And so you were talking about anxiety, their nutrient that they're maybe missing is B12 and them needing the methyl version of that. But if more and more people are having this variant, then doesn't that relate to the increase maybe of anxiety?
It's hard to say that it's causal, right? So you have to be cautious by saying because what I'm about to tell you is if you look at the chart of when we started to spray our grain supply with folic acid and the incidence of ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, you'll see that these are superimposable. That does not mean that there is a direct link. However, when we start to process foods and when we extend the distance from the food to the table, right, from the seed to the table, the issue is in how we process a lot of these foods. So for example, 44% of the population has this MTHFR variant. So if you have this variant, which 44% of the people listening to this podcast do, then folic acid or fortified or enriched foods are your enemy. So when you spin a box of cereal around and it says fortified whole wheat, enriched bleached white flour, these are terrible for you. And what do we feed children before they go to school? Well, the standard American breakfast is a white bagel, a bowl of cereal, Pop-Tart, toast. So we're actually starting to take, remember 44% of kids have this too. So we give them high doses of folic acid, high doses of fortified or enriched foods. And then we wonder why, it's a full contact sport to get them in the car to go to school in the morning. Folic acid can be like cocaine for a 6-year-old that has this gene variant, right? It makes their little brain race.
Wow.
And, and then the calls come home and it's like, hey, little Johnny's not paying attention. He's disruptive. He doesn't follow directions. He's impulsive. He can't complete his assignments. We need to bring in the Ritalin to solve this. Because modern medicine says, well, if the mind is racing, then let's add an amphetamine to the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. And that's a terrible idea. If you think about it, we're taking the system that's not broken and breaking it to match the system that is. And, it's like getting a flat tire and getting out and slashing your other 3 tires to create equilibrium. It works, but now you have 4 problems.
Well, and what's so sad about this is the mom or the parents, they're trying to do what's right and they're thinking, oh, it's fortified. That means it's fortified with some vitamins and some things that are good for my kids. So I'm going to feed them this option. And it's such a...
I agree. Fortified or it's enriched. Which is kind of it's a great marketing gimmick. When we first discovered preservatives, they were called anti-digestives because the process that prevented oxidation also prevented digestion. And then some smart marketer was like, hey, we can't send people to the anti-digestive part of the supermarket. Let's call these preservatives. We call genetically modified foods bioengineered. Most people don't think of bioengineered as genetically modified or genetically engineered foods. But when they say bioengineered, it's very similar to GMO. And when we genetically modified foods, we didn't modify them to increase nutrient density. We didn't actually modify them for crop yield. We modified them to be resistant to poisons like glyphosate. And so glyphosate was killing the plant. So we had to make plants that were resistant to glyphosate. And so we genetically modified the seed. Well, when you genetically modify it, sometimes the body doesn't recognize it. It doesn't have the proper enzyme to degrade through this process called lock and key. It doesn't have the proper enzyme to degrade that nutrient. So all of a sudden you're not pulling nutrients out of the food. When you don't have nutrient dense foods, your brain doesn't get satiated. When your brain's not satiated, it tells you to continue to eat so that it can become satiated. So now you are overeating because you are nutrient deficient, not because you are not calorically sufficient. And so this is why processed foods spark increased hunger, increased appetite. You can feed 2 groups of people the exact same number of calories in the morning, and you feed one group nutrient-dense foods, and you feed one nutrient-depleted food, same number of calories, and nearly immediately the processed food group will have another hunger response, whereas the satiated group will not, based on the same number of calories. And so we have a pandemic of overeating in this country. And, we're the heaviest nation in the world. We're the largest spender in healthcare worldwide. I think we spend about $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare. But we only lead the world in 7 areas. We lead the world in infant mortality. We lead the world in lowest life expectancy at birth. We lead the world in maternal mortality. We lead the world in type 2 diabetes and morbid obesity. And we lead the world in multiple chronic illnesses. So we know that spending does not equate to outcomes. All right, which is why we need to become citizen scientists. We need to develop a fence, if you will, like this invisible fence around ourselves. And we need to start to filter our environment before it gets to the temple. Because if not, our temple will become the environment. If you don't filter your water, your body will filter it for you, right? So if you choose to drink tap water, which I think is one of the 3 things you should permanently get out of your life, then your body will filter out the chlorine, the fluoride, the microplastics, and the pharmaceuticals for you, but at a cost, right? But if we filter our water, it's one less chemical assault that we have to deal with. And that's just not fear mongering. It's actually just trying to get back to the basics. One of the reasons why I drink hydrogen water is because excess hydrogen gas is the natural state for a lot of, healthy, vibrant water that's running in a stream. It also has minerals in it. And, a lot of spring waters and mineral salts will have like 91 different minerals. We become mineral deficient. And so if we did some simple things like got tap water out of our life, added mineral salts like Baja Gold or Celtic sea salts, very inexpensive things to our daily routine, we would see demonstrative changes in our health outcomes. I mean, there's even a very interesting meta-analysis that was published in 2016 in the Wiley Journal of Headaches. There were 3,996 participants. I just had to read the study. 3,996 participants in this meta-analysis. And they found an inverse correlation between sodium and migraine headaches. So in other words, as sodium levels went down, the incidence of migraines went up. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because why would a simple nutrient deficiency in sodium cause something as complicated as migraine headaches? And I'm not saying all migraines are from sodium deficiency, but the vast majority of them are, because we don't have pain receptors in the brain, right? So the brain is actually not capable of sending a pain signal. You think you hurt in the brain, but you don't. You hurt in the dura. You hurt in the covering of the brain, because this saran wrap-like covering over the brain it is fraught with pain receptors, and it can send a pain signal. And it hates two things. It hates being stretched, and it hates being contracted. And so what determines whether or not it's stretching or contracted is mainly sodium and other minerals, which is why mineralizing your water can, and I have seen this hundreds of times, permanently put migraines into remission. Again, I am not saying by any stretch all migraines are sodium deficiency, but clinical studies, large meta-analyses, and one of the advantages that I have is, one of the greatest blessings is that we have a very large clinic system. So we see a voluminous number of new patients, 20,000 in some months, and these are clients that are seeking new genetic tests. So we have a voluminous amount of data on real human beings. And sometimes the simplest of interventions, right? Filtering water, adding mineral salts, adding amino acids, the 8 essential amino acids, adding back the 2 essential fatty acids, the very basics is enough to shift people's entire state, their baseline sense of normalcy.
Wow.
But most of the time when we're chasing the exotics, right? Not the basics.
Well, what's crazy about that with the sodium part is doctors and a lot of people teach lower your sodium. Sodium's not good for you. Lower it for your heart, things like that.
If you think about it, if you were so dehydrated right this moment, anyone listening to this podcast, that you landed in the emergency room, do you know what the very first thing they would give you?
Salt water or salt.
Saline IV.
Yeah.
Yeah. They would give you a saline IV. Why would they give you saline IV if sodium's dehydrating? Well, because it's not, right? We're not hydrated when we have water in our blood. We're hydrated when we have water in our tissues. By no means am I saying just start piling in a bunch of salt. You can actually get this on a blood test and you can get a sodium level. You would be shocked how many people are deficient in sodium as an electrolyte. And by correcting that sodium level, you see demonstratively healthy, outcomes. And I'm not talking about iodized table salt. I'm not talking about, in my opinion, salt sort of climbs the ladder. You can get pink Himalayan sea salt, which is decent, but it's better than table salt. I guess that's a good. The better would be to get Celtic salt, which is another mineral salt because it actually does contain minerals. And the best is something called Baja Gold salt. It has all 91 trace minerals, and they test these salts down to 250 parts per billion. So for a $15 bag of salt, it'll last you 5 years. It is the cheapest biohack and one of the most incredible ways to get all of the essential minerals that the body needs. All the things that we don't, often hear about: molybdenum, selenium, manganese, boron, magnesium. Not the big vitamin categories like vitamin B12 and D3 and vitamin C. These are the minerals. And then, our fatty acids are omega-3 fatty acids, which you can get from plant sources or from fish sources, and the basic 8 amino acids. So it's astounding how many amino acid deficiencies. The reason why 8 amino acids are considered essential is because they are essential for life. And when we don't have these 8 essential amino acids, or we have deficiencies in them, we get the expression of disease. So think about things as common as depression and mental illness. If you said to me, Gary, what is a mood, right? What is an emotional state? I would tell you that it is a collection of neurotransmitters, and they're usually bound to something like oxygen. But if you start to deplete neurotransmission, you start to actually deplete certain neurotransmitters, you get the expression of that missing neurotransmitter. So I tell you, you can be in whatever mood you want. You just can't use serotonin. Okay, it doesn't sound like a big deal. It's only one neurotransmitter, but serotonin is the main driver of mood. So now you have a mood disorder because you're deficient in serotonin. Well, how do we make serotonin? We take an essential amino acid called tryptophan, the one that's famous for making you sleepy at Thanksgiving dinner, and the body in the gut methylates this into the neurotransmitter serotonin. Then it travels up the vagus nerve and goes into the brain where it creates what we would call mood or emotion. So is it possible that our mood disorder or emotional disorder, and I hate those terms, but we'll use them for a second, is the result of a deficiency in an amino acid because the body doesn't have the raw material to make the neurotransmitter that would obfuscate that mood? It's absolutely possible. And so when we're looking for how we can optimize the body, my position is that we should start with the basics of clean water, clean air, hydration, whole foods, and supplementing for the sake of deficiency, not the sake of supplementing.
I love that. Let's actually talk about supplementing, but testing, because I know many people can just go to their regular doctor and you can find your vitamin D levels, your basics, but something like you were saying, minerals, not all doctors test for minerals, amino acids. No, I know for sure on that one. So what should they go get tested and where?
Well, I would suggest that everybody do a genetic methylation test. I offer that test, but again, you don't have to use me. There are lots of companies out there. If you Google genetic methylation test, and I know it's a mouthful, but basically it's a test you do once in your lifetime. And it says, what can my body take in and convert to the usable form? And what can it not convert to the usable form? And then you supplement for that deficiency. So if you can't take folic acid and make methylfolate, you supplement with methylfolate. If you can't take the amino acid homocysteine, which everybody on this podcast currently has in their blood, and methylate that into methionine, which will quiet your mind, then you should supplement with the amino acid required for that conversion. It's called trimethylglycine. So this takes away the guesswork in supplementing, because the supplement landscape is full of amazing products. Is CoQ10 good? It's great. Is ashwagandha good, or St. John's wort, or turmeric, or curcumin, or NMN, or NED, or nicotinamide riboside? These are all amazing things. Resveratrol is a great compound, but pretty soon you get lost in the myriad of what should I take? And the question should be, what do I need? If you fill the deficiency first, then you can get additional benefits from those exotics. But if you're chasing the neurotropic because you have a mineral deficiency, if you're chasing a mental health issue because you have an amino acid deficiency, then if you don't cover the basics, then this becomes a lifetime journey of trying to understand what is wrong with me. And nothing is wrong with you. Your body just doesn't have the raw material it needs to do its job. We see this in the expression of thyroid conditions all the time. People are mainly diagnosed with hypothyroid because they have low levels of a thyroid hormone called T3. But they don't realize that 80% of the T3 in their blood is not made by the thyroid. It's actually 80% of the thyroid hormone T3 is made outside of the thyroid, in the liver and the gut and the periphery. So if 80% of the thyroid hormone T3 comes from outside of the thyroid, why are we medicating the thyroid for a crime it's not committing? why are we actually standing on and medicating a perfectly healthy organ without proving that it's committed some sort of crime? It happens in hypertension all the time. I mean, I was popularized a lot for my journey with Dana White, the CEO of the UFC, and it wasn't really anything miraculous. He just had rampantly high, uncontrolled blood pressure, and he was on, I think, a beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, and also a diuretic for this condition. But when we looked at his blood, we saw abnormally high levels of homocysteine, an amino acid, right, that his body couldn't break down. And because you can't break down this amino acid, I mean, there were some recent published literature in the Journal of Hypertension talking about the elevation of homocysteine and its link to hypertension. Because when this amino acid rises and it's cruising by the inside lining of the artery, it irritates the artery and it causes it to clamp down. Well, if you make the pipes smaller in a fixed system, and our system is closed, right? It's fixed. Pressure goes up. So the pressure is being driven up because the pipes are constricting, not because the heart is malfunctioning. And we pound on the heart for a crime it's not committing. And in 85% of the cases where we're medicating the heart, we don't even have a reason to medicate the heart because the condition is idiopathic. It's unknown origin. But we still say, even though we don't know, let's still apply this medication to this organ. Instead of looking at the biome, going back to basic human physiology and saying, what harm would it be bringing the homocysteine levels back down into the normal range? Because as you drop homocysteine, very often what happens is the vascular laxity returns. You change the diameters of the pipes and the pressure returns.
You would think this is part of medical school, though.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. It's actually frustrating to me because, for instance, let's go back to the thyroid one. I know so many relatives that are on thyroid medication, but never has the doctor talked to them about their liver or their gut.
Yeah, I mean, to be hyper specific, 2/3 of the thyroid hormone T3 is deiodinized in the liver. So in other words, you have a T4 hormone and you have a T3 hormone. And now let's say your T3 is low. The definition of that is hypothyroid, leading you to believe that the thyroid has done something wrong or it's malfunctioning. But if I were a detective and a crime had been committed and there was an 80% chance that one guy did it and a 20% chance that somebody else did it, I would investigate the guy that has an 80% chance of committing the crime first. I would look for nutrient deficiencies and say, maybe the body doesn't have what it needs to deiodinize, to convert T4 into T3. And if we give it that raw material, maybe it will begin to convert T4 into T3, which will look like you fixed the thyroid, but you didn't fix the thyroid because nothing was wrong with the thyroid. You fixed the deficiency outside of the thyroid. And again, I could go through hundreds of examples like this. When we have attention deficit disorder, or which so many people have. We even define this as we call it an attention deficit disorder or an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But the truth is, it's not an attention deficit at all. It's an attention overload disorder. People with AD and ADHD do not lack the ability to pay attention. They lack the ability to pay attention to so many things. If you open thought, which we create thought, right, in our minds. But what we don't have such a good fundamental understanding of is that we don't just create thought, we also break thought down, right? So it's just as important to be able to create thought as it is to break it down. Because if you break down thought, if you dismantle neurotransmitters more slowly than you create them, the mind gets clouded. Too many windows open at the same time, right? So you're thinking about a job you're working on and your friend walks up. So you're thinking about a job, you start talking to your friend. While you're talking to your friend, you notice a logo on their jacket that reminds you of a vacation you want to take. And so you're thinking about a job, talking to your friend, looking at the logo, thinking about a vacation you want to take all at the same time. That's not a deficit of attention. That's an overload of attention. And so if we put back the proper degradation of neurotransmitters, one of the primary ways to do this is get folic acid and fortified or enriched foods out of your life. If we put the proper degradation of neurotransmitters in place, you would create thought to great thought, create thought to great thought, and the mind wouldn't be so clouded. Again, I'm not saying this is in 100% of the cases, but in the vast majority of these cases, these are nutrient imbalances. And, I just don't believe that we're as sick or pathological or as mentally diseased as we think we are. I think we have a lack of mental fitness, but I don't think that we have a pandemic of mental illness just all of a sudden out of nowhere. And so, my whole mission is to try to get, people back to the basics and supplementing for deficiency. And then once we fix the deficiency, well, now we can get data to drill in on if something is really pathological. But just don't accept that because my mother had it, now I have it. I need that. I'm on a lifetime journey of being hypertensive or hypothyroid or Hashimoto's. I mean, the same is true with autoimmune disease. We have the mistaken attitude that the immune system is malfunctioning. I would rather take the position that it's less likely that what God gave us is malfunctioning than what man made us is malfunctioning. If you have bacteria, for example, in the gut, through leaky gut that are exiting the gut and entering the bloodstream, they're passing through the luminal wall of the gut and they're in an area where they shouldn't be. The immune system is properly going to try to stop that from happening. The gut lining is going to call the immune system, the security guard, and say, hey, this guy is not supposed to be in here. Throw him out. And in the process of throwing him out, a fight's going to ensue. It's like a bar fight. You got the bouncer trying to get the bad guy out, and they start going at it, and then all these innocent people are getting hurt, tables get knocked over, and glasses are being broken. Their intention was not to create all of this chaos. The immune system's intention was not to create this massive inflammatory disorder. It was to get something that was in a place it shouldn't be and get it out. And then what do? We hit it with massive amounts of anti-inflammatories and we try to shut the immune system down. We say that you have Crohn's disease because you have an autoimmune disorder. You have Hashimoto's where you're actually manufacturing antibodies to the thyroid. There's a lot of evidence now that it's attacking the thyroid because there are heavy metals or viruses embedded in the thyroid. So if we took the vantage point that the body is behaving, at first, when we first approach these conditions, if we would say, I believe the body is behaving the way that it should. The question is, why? If it's after the thyroid, what is it after? Should we do heavy metal testing? Should we do Lyme disease testing? Should we do viral pathogen testing? If it's after the gut, why would the immune system be attacking the gut? Not because it's misidentified the tissue as being foreign, but maybe it's identified the foreign body and it's properly attacking it. And we can go about fixing the leaky gut and maybe shutting off the immune system. Again, I'm not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but just having read medical records for decades, you see these sort of patterns emerge where instantly when something goes wrong with somebody's body, we immediately think disease is happening to this person. Well, they got Crohn's disease. They have Hashimoto's. They have Sjogren's. They have autoimmune. They have autoimmune encephalitis or any number of autoimmune conditions. I just don't think that what God made us is just spontaneously malfunctioning. I think we are bombarding ourselves with chemical pollutants. Our soil is depleted. Our air is also, polluted. Our water is in some case infused with neurotoxins like fluoride. And if we would start to limit the number of chemical bombardments and get data on our body to make sure we had the proper nutrients, and then when something happens to us, don't immediately go to pathology and disease, go to finding out why would the body behave that way.
I love that mindset because so many people just do think, oh, I'm doomed with this condition or I got this condition. And if we switch that mindset to, oh, maybe my body is doing the right thing, but what's causing it to do that correct thing, meaning like a leaky gut and things are leaking out of the gut or there's metals, heavy metals in the thyroid, the body's miraculous. The body is doing what it's supposed to do, but we aren't doing what we need to do for the body. So it really comes down to us needing to be empowered with this education to know how to treat our bodies properly.
I totally agree with you. Like I have a wall of people behind me back here and, and I mean, there's some A-listers and celebrities, but my heroes are like the people that are doing the real things in medicine, the real MDs, PhDs, researchers that are out there, finding real solutions for humanity, like Dr. Walter Longo, arguably the greatest mind of our time in fasting and research on fast mimicking and intermittent fasting was a Dr. Palmer over here, who's a physician at Harvard, an MD, PhD, that is treating drug-resistant mental illness with diet, right? These are people that believe that in the power of the human body, the ability of the human body to heal itself. If you think that we have 300 billion cells turnover every single day, and out of the 32 trillion cells that we have, every 84 days, nearly the entire cellular living infrastructure in your body is renewed. So why is it that anything that we are facing today, why can't we solve it in the next 84 days? What nutrients are we giving our body? What frequency are we sending through our body? What are we doing to ensure that that cellular turnover is actually as healthy as it can be? Because I believe that no matter what you're facing, almost without limitation, there is a solution, right? And I think that we have just as a society accepted such an erosion of our baseline sense of normalcy that we're fine walking around at 50% of our true state of normal. We're supposed to have, brain fog. We're not supposed to sleep that well. We're really not supposed to be in that great of a mood. We're not supposed to be that, have a healthy libido. After a certain number of years with the same person, we can love them and be attracted to them. We're not supposed to be aroused. None of that is true.
All comes down to knowing how to treat your body. But you need to know how to treat your body by doing the testing so that you understand what's going on in your body.
Yeah, just get data. I mean, no one that owns a successful business has no idea what's going on their balance sheet. We know what employees are performing because we measure their performance. So we don't know what's performing and not performing in our bodies because we're just simply not measuring it. And one of the greatest gifts of modern medicine is we can actually take a deep look inside. I mean, if you want to put 32 trillion of your cells got together in a conference room and wrote a book about you, would you read it? Right? And
yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, the meeting is, hey, here's what we need to do our jobs. Here's what we need to get rid of this waste that's clogging up our system. Here's what we need to be better rested, to better eliminate waste, to repair, to detoxify, to regenerate. Here's a list of everything that we need. That's what you get from a methylation test, right? You don't get it from your aunt or your spouse or your doctor or even from me. My opinion doesn't matter. You get it from your own biome, and that is data that you can rely on, right? Because if you ask your body the right questions, it will give you a truthful set of answers and say, if you give me this and leave me alone, I'll treat you better than you ever thought you could be treated. And then all of a sudden, the things that we want,
Okay, so let me ask you this one question, because I know followers are going to say, wait, I didn't get clarity on this. So do you think that the two tests people should do are the genetic testing and the methylation tests, that they don't need to go do blood work?
So the blood work will change over time. And it will change based on what you supplement with for deficiency. And so, the baseline is you get a genetic methylation test. And this is a test that looks at what the body methylates,
right?
What it converts into usable form, what it does. And as a result of this test, it will say you have the MTHFR gene mutation, which you have. You can convert folic acid to methylfolate, so therefore you supplement with methylfolate. You have an MTRR gene mutation. You have a hard time reducing homocysteine. You need to supplement for the reduction of homocysteine. And then you can select a multivitamin. Doesn't have to be my multivitamin. There are lots of great companies out there. Thorne, Pure Encapsulation, Symbiotica. They're not my companies. They're doing great things. They make amazing supplements for these deficiencies. Or you could take mine and you start supplementing with methylated multivitamin nutrients. Not the unrefined version of it, but the form that your body can use. Now what you're doing is you're giving your body the form of fuel that it can use. It's just like we pull crude oil out of the ground. You cannot put crude oil into your gas tank, right? Because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. Crude oil has to be converted into gasoline, and then the car can run. Human beings are no different. We put lots of crude oil compounds into the body. The ones we cannot convert to gasoline are useless. So if we can't make this conversion, we have a deficiency, and it's this deficiency that leads to a lot of the conditions that we suffer from. And this is a very safe and very effective place to start. And then you can also get blood work done. And I would look at 4 things in your blood. I would look at your hormone balance, your nutrient deficiencies, your glycemic control, how well you control your blood sugar, which is a combination of glucose, hemoglobin, A1C, and insulin. And I would look at your lipid profile. And so when you get this data, right, now you can put an actionable step in place that's meaningful. Just not being diseased is not being in state of being optimal.
Right. You have taught us so much today. I know you've taught the listeners a bunch. I know some of them are probably mind blown by all of this. As we wrap up, though, I have one question about your blood work that you just talked about, because I know my followers. I just know the questions that are going to come. So you did say to test hormones. I get some doctors that are like, that's a joke, you shouldn't do it. Others that are like, yes, you need to do it. Why are you on the side of, yes, we need to test hormones through blood work?
Oh my gosh. I mean, hormone balance is absolutely critical to a state of optimal health. So I'll give you just a couple of quick.
Well, maybe I should reword that question. Maybe I should reword it. They say it's not accurate info because you're testing on all different types or times of the month. You don't know what levels it should be on that day or what, you know what I mean? It's all this controversy of they're a waste because they're not telling you exactly what you need to know about your hormones.
Well, that's not true. I mean, for female hormones, there's something called a Dutch test, which actually tests at different times. And you can actually see the different cycles of a woman's menstrual cycle. So you can see the difference between follicular, ovulation, and luteal. Because in women in particular, it is not the level of hormone that matters. It is the ratio of hormones to one another, right? So, for example, it's perfectly normal for a woman during her menstrual cycle, if she's menstruating, to have estrogen in the 400s. It is also perfectly normal for it to be in the teens. So anywhere between 12 and 420 is normal estrogen, but you have to decide, first of all, what cycle is she in? Is she in follicular, ovulation, or luteal? And then you look at the other hormones to make sure they are monophasic, meaning they are also in the same phase. Because very often, you see, in women, when hormones rise and fall together, you have a happy union. You have a happy bio, you have a happy woman, you have a bright, vibrant woman whose mood may change throughout the month, but you don't have the hot flashes and extreme water retention and the mood disruption and what have you. If they are aphasic, if they are out of phase, and this is where the issue comes into play. In fact, if you look at Dutch testing, which I think is one of the best female hormone tests, our clinic director is a board certified OBGYN, Dr. Sarda. I think she's one of the best regenerative OB-GYNs in the country. But you will see on a Dutch hormone test, which gets ignored by a lot of physicians, you will see one of the gene mutations that I'm talking about. If you did a genetic methylation test, you will see a gene mutation on the Dutch test called a COMT, catechol O-methyltransferase. And why is this gene mutation important? Because if you have it and you don't supplement for it, it doesn't properly get rid of estrogen. It doesn't send estrogen down in what's called the E2 pathway. And so if I'm not getting rid of estrogen, then as a woman especially, you can become estrogen dominant. And what happens when you become estrogen dominant? Well, mood flattens. You retain water, because the primary role of estrogen, in women is to retain water in the interstitial space. When you get pregnant, your estrogen goes from in the 400s to in the 4,500s, over 4,000. And it retains water. So postpartum, women don't want to be estrogen dominant because they will retain water. Now, these women think they're fat, but they're not fat. They're actually water retentive. And very often, women will even get themselves into great shape. And they'll look down, and right below their belly button, there's a little bubble. And it moves laterally around to their flanks, back behind their kidneys. So like if they put their hands in a pair of jean pockets and pulled their hands up, their palms would cover this problem area. Well, this is often referred to as the estrogen band. Nothing that you do will get rid of that without balancing the estrogen, without getting rid of those phytoestrogens and returning the dominant state of estrogen to normal. So these are the reasons why you want to look at hormones. In men and women, we think the primary role of testosterone, for example, is male characteristics, like deep voice, facial hair, aggression, muscles. It's none of those things. The primary role of testosterone in men and women is to put pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. It's one of its primary roles. It's called erythropoiesis. The rise in this free testosterone causes an increase in the number of red blood cells that the bone marrow produces. Very often, when your hormones are low, the pressure comes off of the bone marrow. And what does that mean if you drop your level of red blood cells? You drop the transport mechanism for oxygen. And everything that you perceive about energy is nothing more than oxygen in your blood. If you told me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically what you're saying is I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, then we should try to raise the oxidative state by elevating to the optimal range the number of red blood cells and hemoglobin that we have in the blood, because this is how we move oxygen around. If I deplete oxygen from your blood, it's sort of making you anemic, right? Three things are going to happen. You're going to get tired, you're going to have heady brain fog, and you're going to sleep terribly. And why is it that people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst? Because they're the same thing. They're deprived of oxygen. If I'm low on oxygen, I'm anemic, right? Or I'm just very low on oxygen in my blood, I will be low on energy. And then I'll try to go to sleep. And as I get into a deep sleep, my respiratory rate will become very shallow, which further drops the level of oxygen into a bloodstream that is poorly transporting it as it is. And what happens when my oxygen saturation gets too low? The brain wakes me up. How does it wake you up? It pulses cortisol. And so people that are the most exhausted look like a bouncing rubber ball going down the hallway, right? They bounce in and out of deep sleep. You would think that somebody that's really exhausted would be the best sleeper. You might think the only thing they do well is sleep, but they actually are exhausted and don't sleep well, right? And this is why nutrient deficiencies. In fact, if you, not to bore your audience to tears, but if you were to follow energy from the leaf of the tree down into the soil, you would see that energy equals oxygen. Oxygen is carried by the red blood cell in a fluid called hemoglobin. That is made by the bone marrow, who has a boss called testosterone, which is made from DHEA, which is partially born from vitamin D3. So if you're at the tip of the root, it's vitamin D3. As you move out of the soil, it's DHEA. As you move up the trunk, it's the hormone testosterone. As you continue to rise, it is your bone marrow making red blood cells, filling them with hemoglobin, providing more oxygen, giving you more energy. And this is how nutrient deficiencies in the soil, D3, DHEA, can lead to a lack of energy in the leaf.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's incredible. Like I said, I know my listeners have learned so much from you. They are going to be mind blown by a lot of this. So thank you so much for being here. Will you tell my listeners where they can continue to keep learning from you? Where's the best place to find you?
Well, on Instagram at Gary Brecka, just my first and last name, or anywhere they listen to podcasts. It's called The Ultimate Human Podcast. Spotify, Apple. They'll see a lot of these heroes that I talk about back here.
You guys, the podcast is amazing. It's incredible. If you haven't listened to it, you're missing out. Go subscribe to his podcast and listen to his episodes. You will become so educated about your body and the things that your body needs. Thank you, Gary, so much for being here. I know how extremely busy you are, so I really appreciate that. I close my episodes by asking every guest what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
I think the best ingredient in life is probably the realization that if you really want to shrink your problems, you should grow your purpose. Mm. And for me, that's been the best ingredient in life. My focus on the purpose has dramatically shrunk what I used to consider problems in my life.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to go ponder on that because that actually is pretty deep. I love that. Well,